Okay, so look, again, thanks for having me. The background that you can see is my hometown of Brisbane, so dialing in from Brisbane, and looking forward to heading to Melbourne on the 14th to watch the AO and be part of some of the things we're doing there. So look, today the presentation that I'm going to be talking about is coming at it from a place that it's something that I really believe in, that we need to be focusing on in Australia. And I'm hoping that even though this is coming from an Australian context, it's very relevant for your context in New Zealand. And as you can see on the screen, this idea of know the level, be the level. So where that's really come from is, in my view, in my opinion, over the last sort of decade or so, the Australian standard from a playing perspective, even though you see a lot of our men in the top 100 in the world at the moment, I think the depth of our junior pathway is not where it needs to be by a long shot. We're also struggling a little bit, or quite a bit, in the female side. We're just not seeing the stocks that are going to correlate to what we want to see in terms of the number of Australians and that pipeline of Australian players that are making the top 100 in the world, which we know is where the jobs are, right? So we want to try and crack that top 104 to get into the Grand Slams. From a coaching perspective, what's shifted over time is coaches privately used to look into things like the National Academy to, I guess, understand the level, because there were players, the likes of Ash Barty, that I was lucky to coach when she was 12 to 14. You could actually see a lot of number one juniors in the world. So if you're a private coach, you kind of understand where that level's at. Because our standards have dropped quite a bit, I think one thing that's missing is, I think coaches are forgetting and not understanding what the level is from a playing perspective. That also flows through to what is required from a coaching perspective. So that's where the know the level theme is. You've got to know the level to then, as a coach, try and bring your very best, be the best version of yourself every day to be the level, to be world standard, and hopefully be the ones that are being chased, as opposed to us at the moment, we're the ones that are chasing. So that's kind of the theme, and I'm hoping that resonates. I am coming at this from a very performance kind of minded perspective. However, I do think a lot of the things that we'll talk about today are relevant no matter where you're coaching in the pathway. So that's just a bit of context in terms of where I'm going. I also thought it would be useful just to share a little bit about what we're doing in Australia. I'm a big believer in sharing ideas. There's no magic pill. There's no one way of doing things. There's no magic formula or a framework that's going to solve all our problems. So all I can do today is share a little bit about what we're doing. It might be useful and relevant for you and what you're doing over in New Zealand. I thought I'd just share this because I just talked to where I sit in terms of my role at Tennis Australia, just really briefly. This is our coach pathway. I won't go into this in great detail. However, where my role starts is really around the level 3. So we have a whole coach development team at Tennis Australia that looks after the participation gamut, takes care of all the education and qualifications right through to the club professional, which is the level 2. And then you can choose as a club professional to go through to your Master Club Pro, which is also a level 3. And I'm currently looking after the development or tour level 3, because you can choose which stream you want to go down. And we're working towards actually developing a level 4. We don't have it at the moment, but we want to actually do that. We also have changed the pathway whereby you can enter at any level if you've done enough professional development. So rather than having to go through the levels, we've changed it whereby if you are at the level or you're demonstrating the level, you can enter at any point to go through a particular qualification. So I just thought I'd share that in terms of our pathway at a high level, where I sit in the pathway from level 3 and beyond. In terms of today, just to give you a bit of a steer or a bit of a sense of where I'm going to take this conversation, in my role, and this does flow through to the pathway at large, myself and Belinda Colineri, who's a colleague of mine, who we lead the performance coach space in terms of that education. We've got basically 2 frameworks, and again, this is offered in the spirit that all models are wrong, some are useful. So again, this is not the magic bullet, but we've got basically 2 frameworks that we are using at a strategy level to help us guide what we do and how we go about that. I'm not going to go into this in great detail, but I do want to offer this because, pending time, because I have got a lot of stuff to get through today, this is a way in which we want coaches to try and assess themselves. So we've developed a believe framework, and obviously you can see it's an acronym, and at each level, there are specific elements that you can assess yourself on by using this scorecard at a self level. So you have a self-assessment, and then you can also get a mentor or a head coach to also assess you across these domains to, one, understand your strengths, but also to understand where some of the gaps that you might have in your development might be, so that we can actually direct that professional development towards that. At a really high level, the believe element is about you knowing why you do what you do, why you coach. That can extend through to you at a holistic level, what gets you out of bed every day, through to your coaching philosophy, why you believe what you believe, the values that drive you, etc. The encourage it phase is really about how you look after yourself, because coaching is a really, really taxing, challenging role, and the longevity of what we do is something that I don't think we pay enough attention to. So we have to practice self-care. What are we doing to look after our mental, physical, emotional, spiritual well-being? And then it's about the relationships we cultivate. So we need to encourage a good relationship with ourselves. And also, we know in coaching, if we don't have high trust, quality relationships with the people in which are under our care, then it doesn't matter how much knowledge or how good you are as a coach, the rest will crumble. The next one is how you bring what you believe and what you believe to the court every day. Are you being authentic to what you believe? Do you have a growth mindset? Do you understand the high standards and what that looks like? How do you create that environment? The next layer is about knowing the level. Now, this is a massive gamut of things, but as a coach, we need to know best practice at all levels across the pathway. Then once you know it, you're obviously going to start delivering it. This is the execute phase, from having a vision for your player, how you plan for the future, how you deliver, how you reflect on what's working, what's not working, and how you integrate those learnings on a daily basis. The next is to kind of periodically verify your program, your plan. Is it working? Do you have people, stakeholders, mentors? How do you objectively assess what you're doing and why you're doing it, so that you can understand what's working, what's not? And through that accountability process, you can then go to the next phase, which is to evolve what you've learned through that process to adapt. The learn phase is also about something that I think in Australia we're really battling with, which is cultivating a really learning culture. I don't think enough coaches are out there really trying to be the best version of themselves every day, really learning, growing, having that mindset that we can continuously evolve no matter how good you are. The rubric has 4 levels. So one, at every layer, there are a bunch of questions that sits behind this, and you would self-assess, and also you can get a mentor or a head coach to assess whether you're beginning, developing, competent, or exemplary across any of these elements. The reason why I've actually put a circle around 3 parts of this framework is today I'm going to be talking to those 3 at a high level. So as we go, you can kind of reflect on this yourself, thinking, is this something that I'm, beginning, developing, competent, or exemplary in, which might be useful. It's got a range of material that's going to talk to that. So before I go on, is there any questions just on that? Because I'm mindful that I'm going at speed, and if something's not landing, I just wanted to pause for a moment and see if I can fill in any gaps if I've missed some. Yes, there's a hand at the back, I can see.
Yeah. Is the 2 layers, the first one, 2, 3, 4 is know the level, and then the second layer is how you perform it?
Yeah, sorry. So yeah, and the actual framework we've got, there's normally a self and a mentor or head coach kind of delineation. So one of the inner circle is the self-assessment, and then the outer is the mentor, head coach, whatever it may be that you're working towards. And you'd kind of look at the difference between the 2. Again, it's a really meaty framework. I just wanted to showcase it a little bit. And again, this presentation will talk to some of these elements just to bring into context why I'm actually showcasing some of these things. Okay, cool. All right, let's keep moving. So one of the things that I believe very, very strongly, and look, Simon Sinek has kind of made this famous about, starting with why, hence the whole purpose element. This is the kind of the first of those circles that I showcase. One of the things, if you think about when we work with athletes, the importance of having a shared vision, so what are they there to achieve? What are they motivated by? What are they working towards? And I don't think it really matters what age you're working with, whether it's a 7 or 8-year-old through to a 20-year-old. I think we can have those conversations around something that they're trying to work towards at a future state. It could be a skill, it could be a particular goal, it could be something really aspirational in the future, but I think we all need to have a really clear vision. And it's probably a shout out to you as coaches. If you are not clear and motivated about a future state that you're working towards, I think this is where we can get quite reactive, beholden to the day. It can become a little bit Groundhog Day. I think when we've got a really clear vision, something motivating that we're working towards, it gives us a real sense of purpose. It makes it a lot easier for us to identify the things that we need to be doing on a daily basis to work towards that. And if we're asking the players in which we're working with to be doing that, I think we need to be reflecting that as well. And if you don't have a vision or a future state or a big goal or a dream that you're working towards, I'd really encourage you to start thinking about that. Because a lot of the coaches that I work with are often they're not clear on what that is. And I tend to start there so that you actually get motivated about each day and why you're doing what you're doing. If you think about this, I guess at a practical level or at a change level, a lot of the work I do outside of tennis is in leadership. So I do a lot of work across corporate and government, and I'm an executive coach. And this is one of my favorite quotes that I think is essential for us to understand whether you're trying to change something in yourself at a behavioral level, or even when you're working with the kids in which you're coaching. So obviously, I'm hoping you can see that on the screen, but the quote comes from a guy by the name of Ronald Heifetz, and he's an adaptive leadership kind of guru, Harvard psychologist, etc. And it says, the adage, people resist change. It is not really true. People are not stupid. People love change when they know it is a good thing. No one gives back a winning lottery ticket. What people resist is not change per se, but loss. When change involves real or potential loss, people hold on to what they have and resist the change. So if you think about that winning lotto ticket, you've won 50 million bucks in the lotto, automatically we start to go into a visionary state. We go, new house, new life, new job, new car, new whatever. You just start to think bigger, and you're more than happy to make the change because you fundamentally see the future as better off than where you are right now. If we're trying to influence someone else, we're asking them to do something different. If we're asking them to change at a behavioral mindset, skill, whatever the thing is we're trying to change, if they can't see the future state as better off than where they are right now, that's where change resistance comes from. So when I'm asking coaches to do something different or to change a behavior, to grow, to continuously evolve or develop a particular skill or whatever it is, if we do not start at that fundamental level about what you're working towards, then the change itself is kind of a little bit irrelevant, and it takes a pretty special human being to want to actually make those changes and do the work. Hence why in the last slide, I'm talking about really the importance of starting with a vision. What are you working towards? And this happens at your level in terms of yourself through to the players that you're working with. So I'm hoping that really makes sense. And it sort of grounds, in some respects, that purpose element of the belief framework. Are you beginning? Are you developing? Are you competent? Are you exemplary in really just knowing what drives you, what gets you out of bed? What are the values you have? What are you working towards? And if you don't have something, I think it's something we can develop. Okay, so I'm going to now move on to the second framework that is guiding a lot of what we're doing at Tennis Australia. So the belief framework, which I'll probably bookend this session with, is very much the what in coaching. We're not telling you how to coach. It's just the buckets or the elements of things that we think is important to becoming a very, very good coach or a world-class coach. This is our athlete development matrix, which is about to be relaunched. We had an original matrix that was written in 2007 by Marka Reed, and you may have seen that somewhere because it does, go out into the networks. Belinda and myself are trying to update that, to contemporize that, to make it more user-friendly for all coaches at all parts of the pathway. We've got the one-pager, which I'll talk to you at a high level. And then there's going to be a whole back end that's digitized where if you really want the detail, you can go find it. If you're trying to work on something specific with a player, you'll be able to understand this one pager, go and find that, get the detail. There'll be vision that supports it. There'll be drills, you name it, that will be available. So this is what we're working towards. But the way in which we've kind of developed this from a one-page perspective is as simple as this. And I'm going to showcase a couple of things that we're doing behind the scenes that highlight some of these things. So let's start with the vision. So when you're working with a player, whether it's an able-bodied or a player with a disability, these are some of the goals that we've got, trying to produce top 100 players. We want top 10 players with disability, those in wheelchairs with various different disabilities in our pathway. And the fundamental question we want coaches to be asking is your player tracking? What are their tennis aspirations? I'm going to highlight some of that in a moment about the data that you might need to know, which is informing you in terms of the level that players need to be hitting across different stages of their development. The second, which is, in my mind, has been very, very forgotten, or it's been a part that's been an omission, is the character element. I think that the personal qualities or the character in which we're seeing in our kids is in decline. And I think that's on us. It's not on them. And I know there's other challenges. I know that there's the parental aspects, the social aspects, devices, social media. I know there's a whole raft of things, but I just don't think we're paying enough attention to how we create the environments and the relationships to develop the character attributes in our players that's going to put them in good stead over the longer journey, because this game is bloody hard. And I think character is a fundamental thing we need to develop in our kids. The next is this idea of weapons. So we've had a lot of consultation with a lot of coaches, and fundamentally, and you can test this yourself, these are the 4 weapons that we believe covers every aspect that it needs to cover to be an elite athlete or an elite player. The first is being a great competitor. Second, being a great mover. The third is having power. And the fourth is skill. Now, if you start to play out that in your mind, and you might have other words, and we've done this, I would challenge, and if we've forgotten a word or an attribute that you think doesn't fit, I'd love to hear it. But basically, there's going to be other words you might choose, but you might find that it will fit into some of these elements. Like some people might say, well, where does biomechanics or stroke production? And I'm actually going to do some of that today. Well, some of that would fit under power, because you need to have, efficient movement, efficient sequence. You need to have good biomechanical fundamentals to actually develop power. So the other thing we've done at this level is we don't want coaches or players to feel like you need to be unbelievably good at everything, because it's just not the case. If you start to think about, well, who would be the exemplar, who would be the level in these areas of weapons? When you think about competitiveness, when I think of that word, I start to think of people like Rafa Nadal, Serena Williams, Leighton Hewitt, Novak Djokovic, etc. That is elite. In terms of movement, players that always jump into my mind are people like, Djokovic probably transformed the way we see athletes moving. Alcaraz is another example. And there's so many great athletes on the female side too that are changing the way we move. Power, we've got so many, like, a Sabalenka or who are, players like that. Ash Barty, when she was playing, is elite in skill. Now, what I want you to do is when you start to think about other players, you might find that some of the players that are in the top 100 are not actually elite in one of these. They're solid across the board, but they're not necessarily elite. We do think, though, that if you have one of these that are elite, then you have every chance of becoming a top 100 player. And so we're trying to get coaches to focus on these 4 areas, develop these 4 areas, have a strengths-based approach, but you don't have to be brilliant at all of them. You need to be solid, but you need to probably possess one elite weapon. Some players have 2, but it's very, very rare. Under that is the priority. So how do we actually develop those attributes? And today I'm going to focus a little bit on the kind of preparation or setup sort of phase, and look at the biomechanical stuff. And lastly, there's a whole raft of things that we have in terms of how much should people be playing, how many tournaments, how many competitive matches, how much volume on court, off court. There's a whole raft of stuff that's going to sit behind this. So that's just the 2, I guess, frameworks that we're working towards at the moment. So what I'm going to do now is actually...
We just have a question on that,
yeah.
Scott.
Yeah.
Scott, just one question is, I don't see strategy up there. Does that fall under one of those 4?
Under competitiveness.
I thought it might. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of that will come under the process side. So what we're trying to do there is, as players, we want players to understand why they play, who they are, what they bring to the table. And under the process, there's stuff that sits away. So what are the processes that you use to be competitive? So that could be preparation, things you do strategically to actually get ready for match. And then during competition, what are the things that you do in terms of, sticking to game plans, your patterns of play, and then also how do you adapt when necessary? And then what do you do post? So there's a whole series of things that happens at a strategic level when we talk about that. Cool. Okay, I'm going to keep moving because I've got so much stuff here and I don't want to stop on just frameworks. Okay, so let's get into the kind of the vision side of the matrix. And this is going to be hopefully useful for you all. I find this stuff fascinating, and this very much fits under the know the level side. So you might find some of this data compelling. I certainly do. And happy to field some questions at the end of this or even as we go. So we're trying to update what we have known. Compared to the last decade, players are now achieving their first ATP WTA ranking at a similar age. So males, not much different, around 17, females around 16. In terms of reaching the top 100, it's happening a little later for males. So it's about 23 and a half now. And for the women, it's about 21, just over 21 years of age. In terms of how long it takes to get to the top 100, it's taking a little longer for the males, but 6.1 years, and a little actually considerably longer than what it was between 2003 and 2012 for the females to now it's taking 5.3 years. So these are things you might want to start considering, but please don't use that, which we do in this country, as an excuse. And I'll talk about this idea of late bloomers, which is absolute bollocks for the most part. You might want to consider it taking longer, but please don't use that as an excuse in some respects to think that we've got time, because we don't. The next is just some things to consider. Compared to males, females are achieving their first ranking at a younger age, about 1.3 years younger. They're reaching the top 100 earlier, about 2.1 years younger, and it's taking a little less time. So just sometimes when you do strategy for your pathway, and we've been guilty of this, we have the same for boys and girls or for males and females. And I think we need to start thinking differently about some of these things. So that's just setting the scene on some of those statistics. These are the ranking benchmarks that we're going to be working towards. And this is based on, and I won't go too much into the data side, but this is based on the 50th percentile. Would need a fair while to discuss how we come up with percentiles, but irrespective of the percentile, there's going to be some compelling things I think we can offer here. What you can see for the females is at 16, you want to be around 800, 17, 490, 18, 270, 19, 180, 21, 40, and at 21, cracking that top 100 mark. you might be thinking, holy hell, just hold on to that thought. For the males, 1,300 by 17, and you kind of each year keep tracking through to the top 100 about 23. Now, I want you to please understand that I see this as minimum standards, and I'll talk to why that is in a moment. So that's the kind of trajectories or the benchmarks we're wanting athletes to hit. For me, this is compelling. So when we look at players that have achieved the top 100 ranking after meeting benchmarks an X number of times. So what this is looking at here is between 16 to 21 for the females and 17 to 23 for the males. If you meet that benchmark on the previous slide 0 times in that window. So if you're a female and you don't meet a benchmark between 16 and 21, 1% of athletes over the last decade, born between 1990 and 2000, have gone on to be a top 100 player. We have one example in the world, and it's actually an Australian. It's Astra Sharma. But please understand, she's been in and out, phenomenal achievement, but she's been in and out of the top 100 as well, but she has cracked it. If you meet one benchmark, 8% of players globally go on to be top 100. If you meet 2, 29%, 3, 43%, 4, 80%. And if you meet 5 windows in that 16 to 21 age bracket, 96% of females going to be top 100. And it correlates to something like 84% going to be top 50. For the men, again, if you meet 0 of the benchmarks, 1%, and we've got one example, Chris O'Connell, 7, 14, 11, 41, 80%. So that's the kind of percentages that increase as you meet more benchmarks in those windows. Yes, we've had examples of Luke Seville and Mark Polmans who haven't yet cracked the top 100, and they did meet 5+ windows in those times. I'll open this up to some questions shortly. So I've got 2 more slides on this. This one is basically looking at when you hit a benchmark. So if you're a female and you meet the benchmark at 18, 74% go on to be top 100. If you meet that benchmark at 19, 83% go on. If you meet it at 20, 91, etc. So obviously, if you can find a way to meet the benchmarks at, 18 to 20 for the girls and maybe, 21 and onwards for the boys, you're a hell of a chance of becoming a top 100 player. Lastly, which kind of talks to my late bloomer concept, and I know this is looking at things from an Australian perspective. We've always had this kind of attitude that Australians are late bloomers, and it's something you just keep trying to debunk. So the white line is the top 100 kind of global average, and for our women, most of them have always tracked well and truly under. For the men, and the reason why I haven't broken that down in specific athletes is because we've got probably too many men to put on a slider to get messy. But for the averages, Australians have tracked quicker than the top 100 global for those that go on to be top 100. And one of the athletes I use often is Pat Rafter. People think that Pat Rafter used to be a late bloomer. If you were to think, when did he first crack the top 100? And you start thinking about, what is that question? When did Pat Rafter first crack the top 100? What age? You might be surprised to learn that he was 20. And when you say that to coaches in Australia, it's like, oh my God, I thought he was a late bloomer. No, he wasn't a late bloomer. Yes, he wasn't the best junior, 13, 14, 15, 16. But I tell you what, you've got to be doing the work and being ready for that level as you get close to those late teens and into your early 20s. Okay, so that is showcasing, I guess, that vision component of the matrix, but also giving you a sense, and this is what we're trying to educate coaches in Australia on, is this is the level. These are the kind of things that you need to be thinking about. However, the character element is going to be essential, particularly for those that are outliers, that do sit outside those benchmarks, but they have the personal qualities, the John Millmans of the world, the Chris O'Connells, this is Australian, Alexander Vukic and the like. They've been great kids. They've worked their ass off. They've had all the right personal qualities. They didn't meet every benchmark, but they were there or thereabouts, and they're worth investing in. They're worth having as part of any environment that you're working in. And, this is really important for us to understand. So I'm going to pause there just on that element. Any questions or thoughts? Is it confronting? What's going through your minds? Like, what are you thinking about? Is this, yep, you got a hand up there?
Is it ever worth it to, like, from young ages to try and learn with the professional game in mind, especially when, like, college tennis is getting better and better?
Sorry, is it worth what? Sorry, at the younger ages?
Looking at the end goal of becoming a pro player.
Oh, yeah, so look, it's really important. It's a good call out. It's really important that this information stays with the coach and be very, very careful about how you share this. So the trickiest thing for us as coaches, for those kids that are trying to become professional tennis players, and for parents that are investing a truckload of money in their kids to try and become a professional tennis player, is to balance not crushing dreams, but also bringing some reality and the right conversations to shift the behaviors that help them maximize their potential. So I've got a nephew. Who was born in 2003. So he's 21 this year. He's in the University of South Carolina, and really loving the college experience. And believe me, I try to have these conversations about, look, if you're behind, it's okay. It's just a guide. But what you want to be focusing on is the process and the behaviors that's going to give you every single chance to maximize your potential, and you'll find out a lot about yourself. And for me, to answer your question about whether it's worth it or not, I absolutely believe it's always worth finding out. Give it a go, but don't be placing your self-worth on outcomes, because you're going to learn a lot about life and yourself if you give it 100%. And they're the conversations I think we need to be having. Yeah. Yeah, I think two questions there.
Do you look at any benchmarks or standards for players younger than that?
We do. So we used to actually look at the ITF wholly and solely, but obviously the UTR is changing that a little bit. So we do have benchmarks, and the reason why I haven't populated them is because it's very labor intensive. We've got a team that's actually working on basically an AI that scrapes the internet, and it can kind of translate the data that used to be all hand done. So it's a lot easier at the ATP and WTA level because the rankings are just more readily available. But we do have benchmarks for the ITF as well, and how they correlate, and at what benchmarks the current top 100 in the world, what benchmarks they met from an ITF perspective as well. So we do have that available. Yep, one more.
Just the way you were saying, like maybe some of your standards might have dropped in tennis Australia, or like how you might view it. Let's say, for instance, in Europe, like somewhere like Czech Republic or some countries like that are really coming good, especially in junior tennis. Would you say that's just down to like a good crop of players, or it's down to a philosophy that's working, or why can you get those kind of pips in different federations?
Yeah, let me look. Oh, one sec. Try and find the right slide. Yeah, so what I think is really important, and again, we could spend a whole day workshopping this, but just this one slide. I think personally the demise of what we're seeing for the most part, and again, it's not everything, but for the most part, is that I think standards have dropped. So, we've just taken a group of coaches from Australia to Florida and Europe over the last 24 months. So we've kind of looked at all the best academies in the US. We went through Spain, Italy, to look at a bunch of academies over there, you know, Piatis and Moratoglu's, and we went to Sanchez Academy. We went to Real. We went to a range. I'm just trying to think of all the places we went to. And one of the things that I saw over there was just kids playing tennis. No BS, just getting on with it, working hard. But if you look behind the scenes, like Piatti, for example, he had these 10 commandments on the fence, and they were in Italian, and we kind of asked him to translate, but there was really specific values and behaviors that he was looking for. And we said, well, what happens if people actually, you know, break one of these rules? And he had a kind of a 3-step process. 1 was a warning. 2, if you broke it the second time, you were off for a week. You come back. If you broke it for a 3rd time, you had to train with the lesser players for a month, or you'd have to hit down basically for a month. You'd have to contribute to the program. So that was just an example of one of the things that I think lets us down culturally, particularly at Tennis Australia. One of the things we do sometimes is we get that thirsty for a result. We compromise on standards, we compromise on behaviors, we compromise on what we believe to be important. And parents are out there lying awake at night trying to figure out how to get the best deal for their kid. And they will look for the lowest common denominator. And if we aren't standing shoulder to shoulder as a program or as a federation, then they're going to smell that. They're going to look and prey on that weakness. And then once you start doing different things for different kids, then we've culturally lost it. And so I think in terms of developing character, I think we have to be far more clear on what it is that we think is important in terms of the character needed to be successful and resilient for life on the tour and for life ahead. What are the standards and behaviors how do we cultivate that through an awareness of those behaviors and those standards, and then the courage to actually have the follow through when people aren't doing the right things. Do it in a supportive, educative way, but we must follow through. That great quote, the standard we walk past is the standard we accept. I think we need to do a far better job in that area. Good. Yeah. Keep going.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So let's so just to bring into where we're sort of at, cover a bit of the data, know the level. Just going to move into one element, which is the power element. And for me, this is a bit of a refresher for some, and it might be completely a new language for others. But under the power banner, we've got these kind of 3 buckets of things. There's going to be a raft of information that sits within this, and we're just going to have a bit of fun with some of the stroke production things. So let's just work through this as a group. And why am I doing this? I know that some of you may not have been exposed to biomechanics or stroke production, depending on your qualification levels, etc. But for me, I think no matter what part of the pathway you're working at, I think we need to have very good awareness of the fundamentals. And when I look at a lot of Australian kids serve these days, our serving, for the most part, is diabolical. And I think that the fundamentals that used to be taught once upon a time have just kind of fallen by the wayside. And I think as professionals, we need to understand this, to understand cause and effect, and then know how about, I guess, influencing or teaching what we're looking for. But you need to know the theory to be able to be good at the practice, in my view, because what I see often is people actually intervening, and they haven't understood cause and effect, and you actually make things worse. So one of the things that we're trying to really get coaches to think more about is this, so that then you have the theory to then get better at the practice. So let's just have a bit of fun with this. I'm not trying to single anyone out here, or we're just going to, as a collective, go through this as a bit of fun, hopefully, a bit of tennis talk, and maybe you might learn something in the process if you're not aware of some of these things. So I'm going to test some of the vulnerability and courage in the room. But if we start with the first question, what is the definition of horizontal separation angle relating to the serve? So who's willing to have a crack at that one? Anyone willing to have a go? What is the definition of horizontal separation angle relating to the serve?
How far we can get shoulders past hips in the preparation.
Perfect. Great. So the way I like to think about it is just look at where a player's belt buckle is pointing, or their navel, and where's their sternum. And the differential between those two is your X factor, your separation angle, which is going to give you some power. So fantastic. What's the next one? What are the 3 rotations on the serve? And list in order when they are used in the forward swing of the serve. So there's 3 rotations, list in order. So what's the first rotation on the forward swing of the serve? What's the first one? Who wants to have a crack?
Come on, Ronald.
Sorry?
I'm nominating someone.
Yep. What is it?
Waist, waist, shoulder, arm,
What was that one?
waist, shoulder, arm.
No, these are trunk rotations. I should say 3 trunk rotations.
Would that be waist, cartwheel, and somersault?
Yeah, so the first one, I think someone said somersault. So the first one is the somersault or cartwheel. So when we get into trophy, and as we start to drive, the first trunk rotation is shoulder over shoulder or cartwheel. Yeah. What's the second one?
Twist,
Twist. Yep. Perfect. And the last, someone said it before too.
somersault.
Perfect. Okay. So if you don't know these, write them down or commit them to memory. And I'm going to talk to you why this is important in a second. Shoulder over shoulder or cartwheel, twist, somersault. Okay, so explain the role of internal rotation of the shoulder in the serve and how it is developed. What's the role of internal rotation? And I'm going to give you the first one. Internal rotation is part of long axis rotation, but what's probably the main role that internal rotation does in the serve?
Acceleration.
Did someone say acceleration or speed for the serve? Yeah. Yes. If you did, perfect. So it's actually responsible for a certain percentage, which is the next question. What do you reckon the percentage of racket head speed is generated from internal rotation of the shoulder or upper arm? What percentage of racket head speed is generated from just internal rotation?
80.
Yeah, not quite so much. So it's 40%. So 40%. I'll show you a graphic in a second. I'll show you a graphic in a second. Okay, this one is really, really important. Okay. What are the 3 characteristics, or I guess elements, that promote or assist with internal rotation of the shoulder? So internal rotation of the shoulder is an outcome. What are 3 characteristics or things that promote or assist? So let's try and go in order. What's the first thing that you think is one of the most important things for internal rotation? First one. Start down below the waist.
Oh, it's the back. Stop.
I'm not hearing anyone clearly. Sorry. What? Okay, let me give you the first one, because I'm not sure what people are saying there. I can't quite hear you. The first one is back leg and hip vertical drive. So back leg. So if you're a right-hander, it's your right leg, the acceleration of the leg and hip vertically. That's the first thing that promotes, and I'll get to how we do this. That's number 1. What's the second that promotes? Number 2.
Non-dominant arm.
Yeah, look, you know what? I like that idea of the non-dominant handle, your tossing arm, imagining you're on the sort of the monkey bars and you're pulling down, but it's part of the thing that we spoke about in terms of trunk rotation. It's shoulder over shoulder. So the more front on we are at impact, the more front on, the longer we get through impact, the less internal rotation of the shoulder we get. The more we're driving the back leg and the more we're shoulder over shoulder, the more it promotes internal rotation of the shoulder. I'll show you a graphic in a second. And the third, I'll just, for the sake of time, I'll move it. It's ball toss position. So if you get your ball toss at 12 o'clock, the further you go to the right as a right-hander, so the further you get to 1 o'clock, the more it diminishes internal rotation of the shoulder. So a kick serve promotes internal rotation of the shoulder more than a swing serve, okay? So if you're seeing someone who's a bit too far to the right, bit front on, there'd be factors that are getting in the way, but the number one thing we want to start with is legs, back leg. And if you're thinking about 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, I think get the upper half working correctly, and when legs are able to be introduced, then you would go to that stage at say 10 or 11 or 12, whatever physical capabilities they have. And what is the primary role of pronation on the serve? Because we in Australia, we have a lot of coaches talking about pronation, and it's very different to internal rotation of the shoulder. What's the primary role of pronation? Racket face orientation. So this is internal rotation of the shoulder is responsible for the speed. Pronation is just helping us kind of orient and gives us a little bit of bang for buck with speed. So just to bring that to your information, here's some of the percentages that contribute to racket speed at impact. So leg drive and trunk rotation, 10 to 20%, but please understand that there is a direct correlation between those that have the fastest back leg or vertical hip drive, the more it correlates to serve speed. So you can see there on the upper arm internal rotation, that's responsible for about 40%. So the most of all of them. But please understand that back leg and hip, shoulder over shoulder, are two things that helps maximum external rotation of the shoulder to then give you more distance to accelerate into internal. So there's cause and effect there. Any questions on any of that so far?
Yeah, I've got a question.
Yeah.
How much does height play a factor in the speed of the serve?
Obviously, I couldn't give you the exact percentages, but if all things were equal, meaning if I'm 5'10", which I am, and I'm John Isner, for example, all things being equal, and we vertically drive our back leg, we have the same biomechanics, the same fundamentals, etc. He has longer levers, right? Which means he's going to produce more speed. The only two ways to increase speed is to increase distance, right? And travel at the same speed, like in the same time, or decrease the time it takes to travel that distance. They're the two ways to increase speed. So longer levers is going to promote if all things are equal, but doesn't always correlate that way.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Just wanted to ask, so if there's more internal shoulder rotation in the kick serve, does that mean that you're accelerating faster to a kick serve than you would to a flat serve?
Not necessarily. Just I'm just trying to highlight that if you're working with someone, and we're going to actually see a player in a second that is going to be long through impact. Your go-tos is check their back leg drive, check their shoulder over shoulder and whether they're front on at impact or not, and their ball position, ball impact position. So if you're trying to improve internal rotation, then there's every chance it could be either legs, not enough shoulder over shoulder, or ball toss. So you'd have to look at those three factors. But yes, second serves do promote more of that, but you can still be front on and still not have internal rotation. So there's correlating factors, if that makes sense. Okay, let's just keep moving. Sorry, I'm just gonna. So I like to look at Pete Sampras because he's one of the best of all time. I played this guy a few times, ridiculously good serve. What he does is he loads his back leg back and down. You'll see a lot of players not do this well. So his separation angle is phenomenal. He's loaded his back leg incredibly well. His ball toss position, his shoulder over shoulder is all phenomenal. And that's why you see someone do this. You can see how side on he would have been an impact. You can see how much internal rotation of the shoulder. And because he's doing all the fundamentals well behind the scenes. So what he does in the loading phase through to impact is phenomenal. That's why he gets this such great internal rotation. I'm not going to do that right now, but I want to have a quick look at, I'm going to stop sharing that. And let's look at, okay, can you see this? Is everybody seeing that? Yeah?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, cool. So I'll just play this at regular speed, then I'll slow it down on a couple. Okay, just let me show you the side view. Okay, so let me start, and just for the sake of time, if we were going to really analyze this serve, obviously start with the strengths, and I'm just going to share a couple of my thoughts there. So really, good young athletic girl. Her rhythm in general is really good. She's got some really good fundamentals and mechanics, the rhythm, the flow, a lot of good stuff going on, right? So let's make sure we always honor the good stuff. If we were to look at some of the things that she can improve over time, hopefully you're starting to see exactly some of the things that we've been talking about. So just pay attention to a couple of things here. So okay, so how would you rate her separation angle? Horizontal, sorry, I won't say vertical. Horizontal separation angle. How would you rate that? Could it be better?
Yeah.
Yeah. So her hips and shoulders are kind of pointing in a very similar direction. Okay, so not a great deal of separation angle. Which leg is she loaded more on, the left or right? Left, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you see a lot of female players do this, when you load on the left leg, you often get a high right arm as well. Notice how her arm is a little higher than the shoulder alignment. If you can get hips and shoulders and arms all in a line, that's typically because the back leg is loaded correctly, typically speaking. Okay, so if she was using a back leg to load a little bit more, that would be ideal. Now, because she loads on her left leg, she doesn't have a lot of separation angle. Notice how front on she is in impact. So would you say very little shoulder over shoulder, but a lot of twist and a lot of somersault? Yeah. Now watch how long she is through impact. Yeah. Okay. So this is just an example of when you're looking at players, and this kid is good, right? She's a good little player. But if we don't address this, I think we're not going to have the serve we need to have. Yeah. It'll be a good serve, but this could be a cracking serve if we just start with some of the fundamentals. Hopefully that's making sense and coming through loud and clear for you all on the screen. Okay, let me share this back again. Okay. All right. Okay, we're nearly at 11:45, or my time anyway. So basically, hopefully the method in my madness has made a bit of sense here. Spoken about know the level, be the level. Spoken about the belief framework, kind of focused a little bit just on the purpose and do you have a vision and are you being the best version of yourself every day? We've had a look at some data around knowing the level from a trajectory perspective. We've spoken a little bit about stroke production or biomechanics, knowing those levels. And then also just implied or implicitly, we've been speaking a little bit about how as coaches we need to become learners, just keep growing, keep developing. And so when you start to think about this framework as a coach, you might say, look, over those three areas that we've kind of touched on today at a very high level, am I beginning, developing, competent, or exemplary in those three areas? And if you've got some room for improvement, then really kind of drive your own ship in terms of what that looks like, in terms of your own development, to keep progressing, to keep being the best version of yourself every day, so that we, as the custodians of the players we're working for and the programs we're running, then we can be very influential in terms of changing some of the performance outcomes we're seeing. As much as we don't want it to be about outcomes, we want it to be about the process. But when you think about outcomes, excellence is hard to keep quiet. And I keep trying to challenge myself and the people I work with to just keep striving to be the best version of yourself every day. So I won't go through that now, it's too long. Okay.